Welcome back. Well, at the Melbourne Press Club this lunchtime, the Victorian ALP State Secretary is dissecting Labor's election loss last month. But federal Labor MP Kelvin Thomson has delivered his own brutal assessment of what went wrong, claiming the party fell out of touch with ordinary people. He joins me now from Melbourne. Thanks for your time, Kelvin.
Good afternoon, David.
John Brumby largely blamed the "it's time" factor for his loss. Are you saying that that's nonsense?
Well, certainly it becomes more difficult for governments to get re-elected the longer they've been in office. But if we simply say that it's a question of its time, as if governments are changed by the voters once a decade without regard to circumstances, we risk that becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy and sitting around waiting for a decade for the Liberal government to fall out of favour. So I think what we have to do is, in a clear-eyed way, analyse what factors caused voters to change their minds and to vote Liberal at the last election.
Well, one of the main factors that you've pointed out is you claim that the Brumby government was largely out of touch with ordinary people. In what way?
Well, the real issue in the Victorian election was Melbourne's rapid population growth. The vast majority of electorates that Labor lost in the election were electorates in Melbourne, and the fact is that Melbourne has been experiencing unprecedented population growth, 200 people a day, 1,500 a week, 75,000 a year. And the consequences of that have been rising cost of living, traffic congestion, planning problems, crime, declining housing affordability, and they are the things which cost us support. So we need to understand that they're the things which cost us support and to develop policies to address those things.
Yes, but you blame runaway growth, but isn't growth also largely behind Victoria's strong economy, and wouldn't many people in the community see that as the lesser of two evils?
Well, evidently they didn't, David, because they voted for a change of government, and it's clear to me that people in the outer suburbs were experiencing severe cost of living pressures. For example, in the last decade in Melbourne, electricity prices have doubled. They've risen by 50% in real terms, and the same thing for council rates. They have doubled in the last decade, a rise of 50% in real terms. So those things put cost of living pressures onto people living in the outer suburbs, in particular in Melbourne. We also saw very serious planning issues. I had in my own area a constituent who'd been a lifetime Labor supporter approached my office a couple of weeks before the election saying there was a planning application for a 12-storey block of apartments at the back of his house, and I wasn't game to ask him who he voted for. So when you look at the planning issues, the clearway extensions and other consequences of runaway population growth, it's clear to me that they were vote changes, and that we need to understand that and produce policies to address the cost of living issues, to address the planning issues, and to return planning powers back to ordinary people.
So what's the solution then? Assuming we cut or at least limit migration from other states, migration from overseas, how then do you deal with the impact on the economy and on the skills base as well?
My view is that we should reduce our net overseas migration to 70,000 a year. That is the kind of level that we had in various years back in the 1970s and 1980s. It was perfectly consistent with economic prosperity and economic growth, and indeed there are many countries around the world, the most successful countries economically around the world, that don't have rising populations, that have managed to stabilise their population and still enjoy economic prosperity.
Okay, so in your view then, so far, has the self-assessment by Labor in Victoria been adequate in any way?
Oh, well, it's early days in relation to this, David, but I think we do need to engage in some self-assessment and to understand the issues which have caused people to change their minds. And I think if we do that, we will come up with good policies. For example, on the cost of living pressures and the electricity prices and the council rate rises, I don't see any reason why state governments shouldn't be saying to electricity companies, you will peg your electricity price rises to the pension increase, so that if they want to collect more money from that, then they should do it from the property developers and the businesses who are the beneficiaries of the additional infrastructure which is required as a consequence of population growth. Ditto with council rates. I don't see why ordinary pensioners and ordinary householders should be footing the bill for rapid population growth.
Well, shouldn't Victorian Labor picked up on this much earlier, rather than looking back and finding out what went wrong? Does this mean what you're saying, that people should lose their jobs, that they should have realised that this was such a big issue earlier?
Well, I think it's a pity that it wasn't addressed during the period of the last state government, but it's not for me a question of looking backwards in that sense. It's a question of saying what policies do we need to adopt in order to go forward and to win back support from Victorians. And I think if we adopt appropriate policies on electricity prices, on council rates, on planning issues, giving people back a say in the kind of neighbourhood that they live in, then I believe we will win back support.
So do you have confidence then in the State Secretary, in the campaign director for Victorian Labor?
I have confidence in the people who administered the campaign and confidence in the people who are in the previous government. They worked very hard and they did lots of good things of which they can be proud. Where the focus needs to be is not on the personnel but on the policies, and to say that to run a high migration, high population policy is going to be one that's not good for Melbourne and not supported by Melburnian residents, and we need to change our approach.
Kelvin Thomson, Federal Labor MP, thanks very much for your views on this.
Good to talk with you, David.